Welcome back. We're at part 3, solving equations with variables on both sides. And we're going to start out looking at equations with grouping symbols. We've gone through some problems with variables on both sides. We've gone through a couple of word problems. So we're going to look at some equations that appear very complicated at the beginning, but if you break it down into the properties and the steps that you know, and they're very simple. So we're going to get started with this first one. 2 times the quantity, so then we have our parenthesis there, 3x plus 1 equals 4 times the quantity, x minus 5. So again, taking first glance at this, it does look rather difficult just because there's a lot going on there, but you know each one of these steps. So let's analyze the left-hand side first. Let's just look at this side here. Whenever you have a number attached to the parenthesis, we've talked about this already, there's not an operation between the 2 and the parenthesis. This indicates multiplication. Okay, if there were a plus sign here, we wouldn't be having this conversation, but because there is not a sign, it's understood to be multiplication. So you all know the distributive property. You take that 2 and you distribute that to everything in the parenthesis. Well, the very first thing in the parenthesis is a 3x. So 2 times 3x. When you distribute in, it's multiplication. So 2 times 3x gives us 6x. And then we have our 2. We have to distribute to everything, so be very careful with that. A lot of people will leave this last one off. 2 times a positive 1 is a positive 2. So be very careful with your signs as well. Alright, so that takes care of the left-hand side. We remove the parentheses by using the distributive property. So now we're going to write our equal sign and move on to the right-hand side. So we've got our 4 attached to our parentheses here, again by multiplication. It's understood there. So since we have multiplication here, we are going to use the distributive property again. So 4 times, now I get a lot, well, this is just an x. Well, yes and no, it is just an x, but there is an understood 1 in front of this x. Now you can write that 1 in there, or you can leave it out, that's up to you, but you're multiplying 4 times 1x. So 4 times 1 is just simply 4x. And then again, please don't forget, you've got that last one there. We've got 4 times, and this time we have negative 5. So be careful. 4 times negative 5 will leave us with negative 20. And again, we are done with the right-hand side. We remove the parentheses using the distributive property. So now we're back to the problems that we had actually in part 1 of variables on both sides, where we need to identify our linear terms. So I'm going to bring up my green highlighter here. I've got a 6x. Here's one linear term. And my other linear term is 4x. And what I want to point out is that they are on opposite sides of this equal sign. One's on the right, one's on the left. So we will have to use inverse operation to move one to the other. And again, I'm going to go with the suggestion that I always use of moving the smaller variable. So this is an understood positive 4x. So to move that to the other side, we're going to subtract 4x. The opposite of a positive is a negative, so subtract 4x from both sides. And again, if you've highlighted your linear terms, it does make it a little easier to identify where to line your subtraction problem up there. But we have 6x minus 4x, which leaves us with 2x plus 2 equals, and on the other side, this is 0, which was the point of subtracting 4x. But then we have to be careful. We've talked about this also. We are left with a negative 20. So make sure that when you bring that down, you bring down the negative sign with your 20. And now we're at a two-step equation. So hopefully at this point you are pretty confident with two-step equations. Instead of adding 2 to both sides, now we are going to, or because we are adding 2, we are going to use the inverse operation, which is to subtract 2. So we are left with 2 minus 2 gives us 0. We have 2x equals, and then negative 20 minus 2. So be careful if you're typing that in your calculator. That gives you negative 22. And then last but not least, since we are multiplying by 2 here, the inverse would be to divide by 2. So I'm going to write my answer over here. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So I'm left with 1x equals, and negative 22 divided by 2 gives us negative 11. It's not a bad idea to go back and double check. You could put that in your calculator here, typing this in exactly the way you see it on the left hand side using negative 11 for x, and then doing the same thing on the right hand side using negative 11 for x. And you should get the same thing on either side of your equal sign, just verifying that you do have the correct answer. So what I'd like for you to do is try this question here on your own. 4 times the quantity 2y plus 1 equals 2 times the quantity y minus 13. So take a moment, pause the video, and solve that equation for y. Okay, hopefully you're coming back from solving this equation. We're going to kind of go through this maybe a little faster than we did the first example, but you should be able to recognize anytime you see parentheses with a number there in front, there's not an operation there on either one of these, so that indicates multiplication. So that should automatically register with your brain that this is the distributive property, so we need to immediately go into distributing. So we can take 4, distribute it to that first term, which is 2y. So 4 times 2y gives us 8y. And then we have 4 times 1. That's easy. 4 times positive 1 is positive 4, but be very careful. People do make a mistake there. They just write a 1 down because they forget about multiplying by 4, so be very careful. Alright, we've taken care of the left-hand side, so we're going to write our equal sign and move on to the right-hand side. 2 times y gives us 2y. Remember, that's a 1 there in front of that y, so if you want to think of it as 2 times 1y, 2 times 1 is 2. So we have 2y there, and then we have our last one here, 2 times, and this is a negative 13, so be very careful. 2 times negative 13 gives us a negative 26. And we're back to our normal variable on both sides equation we've looked at several times here. Our linear terms are 2y and 8y. They are on opposite sides of this equal sign, so we will have to use inverse operation. Smallest variable is that positive 2y, so the inverse or opposite of positive 2y is negative 2y. So subtract 2y, excuse me. That is a mistake some people make. Make sure you're not doing minus a negative 2y. Minus a negative would actually be a plus. So you're not changing your sign there if you do that. So make sure you're either adding or subtracting. Try not to mix the two together. So we are just subtracting 2y from both sides. So 8y minus 2y gives us 6y plus 4 equals, and then on the other side, This is 0, but again, we have that same thing here we have in other problems. This is a negative 26, so make sure you carry down that negative sign with your 26. And we have a two-step equation. So the inverse of adding 4 is to subtract 4. So 4 minus 4 gives us 0, and we are left with 6y on the left-hand side. And then on the other side, be careful if you type this in your calculator, you're down 26, so negative 26, and then go down 4 more. Negative 26 minus 4 gives you negative 30. And then the inverse of multiplying by 6 is to divide by 6. 6 divided by 6 is 1. So I'm going to write my answer over here. 1y equals, and I have negative 30 divided by 6, which leaves us with negative 5. And again, it would be really good practice, and hopefully you did this on your own when you solved this problem, but go back and plug that in for y in your equation, and just make sure that negative 5 does in fact create equivalent sides there. The left and right hand side of your equal sign should come out to be the same number when you plug in negative 5 for y. You are now ready for the fourth and final part of equations with variables on both sides, and at the end of this video, of the next video, will be your summary that you must answer along with your notes.